respected mixed martial arts trainer and one of the pioneers. So, Ray, if you had to tell us what was the impetus for you becoming involved, what was that inciting incident that spurred a lifelong interest in combat sports?
You know, I don't really think I have an incident. I've trained a million guys, and you know, everybody who got robbed, who had their bicycles stolen, who got mugged. But I did hang out when I was really young. I hung out with older guys in the neighborhood playing sports, and I was intrigued by, they would always tell me about this little guy in the neighborhood who was a good fighter, who did martial arts. And we're talking, we're in like 1970, 71 now, so there wasn't the internet, there wasn't anything, you know, it was more word of mouth stories at that point. And how, you know, this little guy was beating up some of the guys that I thought were bullies in the neighborhood, or were considered tough guys in the neighborhood. And that's really what intrigued me. And then I started to, you know, what does he do? And you know, he's into karate and this and that. And I was probably about 12 or 13, which back then, you didn't have schools on every corner. You know, and again, you didn't have videotapes, you didn't, what you have. I mean, so it was really word of mouth, and whoever was doing something in the neighborhood, you tried to pick up on. But that was more it. It was more, you know, a couple of stories I had heard from some of the older guys in the neighborhood, and I was intrigued how a little guy could flip a bigger guy, things like that. So that's the real impetus.
So speaking of, as you say, getting involved, and it's not like there were studios on every street corner or places where people could go. But as we say, you were considered one of the early pioneers of mixed martial arts. You were involved almost from the beginning, at least in the United States, more than 20 years ago. So for yourself, why were you interested in mixed martial arts as opposed to, let's say, other forms of fighting?
Well, for the mixed martial arts, probably in like 83, maybe something like that, I got involved with doing Jeet Kune Do, which was obviously Bruce Lee's style of martial arts. And if you really go back and look, they consider him kind of like the pioneer or the grandfather. He had the insight years ago that, you know, there were different ranges of fighting. You know, when guys were still just doing like, you know, katas and were more, you know, karate practitioners, you know, he knew that wrestling was a martial art. He recognized boxing as a martial art. He recognized, you know, kickboxing, Thai boxing. He did his research, and I think he kind of had, like, again, I mean, that was at the time, he had to be in the 60s, 1960, whatever. I mean, to have the foresight to see where that was going, and you have to kind of, it might sound weird now, but you have to put yourself in that time, if you could, which is hard for most people that are below, you know, the age of 40 probably, that there really was nothing. So when he would say put on a pair of boxing gloves, or he was hitting a heavy bag, that was considered crazy, believe it or not. You know, nobody was doing that. Everybody was doing their katas or whatever martial art they had. So I mean, you know, becoming involved in Jeet Kune Do was, you kind of already were wrestling. You were doing not to the sophistication of today's martial arts, but you had the framework. So when the you know, the UFC started, we were already kind of grappling and blending the kicking with the ground stuff, and it kind of seemed like a natural progression to me.
Okay. Well, speaking of which, now, in more latter day, you're, as you know, considered one of the best striking coaches in the UFC. You're credited with helping one of the great upsets, Matt Serra, defeat George St. Pierre. If you could explain, why is your style of strike training unique, or what is it about your technique that makes it special?
Yeah, no, I don't think it's a special striking system. I think when you're training people, you have to make a connection. I mean, obviously Matt, you know, is like a brother to me at this point. So I mean, there's years of training together, and I think it's really how somebody can just transfer the information. I mean, you know, it's a little crazy to think Steven Seagal taught Anderson Silva how to throw a front kick. You know what I mean? So I don't want to go that route and say, you know, there's something special. But I think, you know, I was surrounded by good people when I was young, and I was able to pass that information on. And, you know, some guys you can't make a connection with. It doesn't matter how good you are as a trainer. But with Matt, I was able to make a connection. We became good friends. And, you know, when he's fighting, I feel like I'm fighting. So I think all of those little things added up, he kind of makes me look better, put it that way. He gets to go in there and try the stuff I'm telling him, you know what I mean? So he's got the hard job. I'm just a conduit of information, and he takes it and he goes in there and experiments.
That's terrific. Now, Matt Serra has talked about, say, worst-case scenario drills, where you set your fighters up in potentially match-ending spots to work out possible means of escape. Is that something you've always used with your fighters?
No, I think that's probably, I'll give that credit. No, Matt brought that in. He's, with the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, they'll always make, a guy get, like, with the hooks in on your back. What's the worst case scenario? You're mounted.
Right.
I mean, nobody really wants to be mounted, right? That's if you fuck up, you make a mistake. Excuse the language, but you make a mistake, so you better be prepared to escape the mount. You don't want to end up in the mount, all right? You don't want to end up with a guy on your back with the hooks in, choking you, but those are worst case scenarios. So those drills, I'm going to say, either I have to credit him, or I have to give it to. I think, I trained with him in the early days of jiu-jitsu. They used to make us do those worst case scenarios. So they came up with that where, they want to put you in the worst case scenario, and you have to be able to get out.
Right.
And then, God forbid you end up there, it's not a surprise to you.
Okay. If you had to talk about the most memorable moment of your career as a trainer, or you could talk about a few, but right now, what really comes to mind?
Well, obviously, Matt winning the title and being the biggest underdog in UFC history is got to be a memorable moment. But there's also kids that I trained that couldn't even get through college. One kid just became a doctor like 2 years ago. So those are the stories. I mean, it's really you want to make the fighting work for you. It's not just about fighting. So. Matt winning the title is great. Matt being a successful entrepreneur with 2 schools and having a family and being that obviously is a better priority for me to look at as something as being a part of or being accomplished or having as an accomplishment is really watching him grow as an individual and being successful. But the UFC 69 will always stand out in my mind. I mean, I'll give you a good story to that. As we were walking to the octagon that night, Diego Sanchez, I think he just had gotten done fighting Josh Koscheck,
yeah,
and he had a mariachi band with him. And as we were going by, the mariachi band started playing the theme to Mission Impossible. So I mean, you think it's bad when you got but. He was able to pull it out, and I guess the rest is history. So that's a great moment. But I really like when I see a guy who's got the potential to end up as a security guard or as a civil servant. Not that there's anything wrong with that, and really elevate himself to another level through the martial arts that's always great. And I got a million of those stories. I think that's what keeps me going.
Now, much of your clientele now come from all walks of life. You're not just dealing with elite athletes. So you as a trainer, how do you change your techniques, or how do you train a very fit accountant, for argument's sake, versus somebody that wants to be an elite level fighter? Let's say a 20-year-old kid, fresh out of high school with a fighting background. How do you start one versus the other, and how does that progress?
Honestly, I train them the same way. I watch the sparring. It has to be different, depending on how old everybody is. But I have other people. I'll normally get like a senior student to spar with a guy who's an accountant who has no ego, and the accountant can hit him or whatever. And really the training is the same though. As far as I might cut down on some of the calisthenics and that type of stuff, but we train them the same way.
Okay. Now, besides technical training, what are some of the core values you teach to your students, if possible, to make them grow into better people as opposed to just great athletes?
I mean, it's not really teaching them. It's that really through the hard work and the sparring, you're teaching yourself. I mean, you got to dig down deep. Things aren't always going to go the way you want them. What happens when you hit a little adversity? Are you going to quit? You're going to keep going? I mean, those are things that are going to come from within, but through the sparring, they're going to learn. And it's really just the hard work and then having somebody there to guide them when they encounter some of these things.
Okay. If you could discuss, in your eyes, how mixed martial arts, what we call mixed martial arts now, which includes grappling, submission fighting, the whole thing, how has that evolved since its infancy?
No, man, I mean, you just go back and look at, you know, UFC 1 through 10 and look at UFC 120 to 128 or 27, whatever we're up to. Everybody's more well-rounded. I think back then you had who came in as just a strict wrestler, who came in as just a strict jiu-jitsu guy, a strict boxer with one glove on, you know, a strict kickboxer. Now, you know, obviously it's everybody's blending, and you're seeing kids start out at, you know, 14, 15 at a boxing, they're wrestling, they're doing jiu-jitsu, they're doing everything, and you're really starting to see almost things, you know, come full circle back to just having a good knockout punch, but you can defend the takedown, you know, so yeah, everybody's just more well-rounded, you know.
Okay. Well, speaking of well-rounded, it's very obvious that having a wrestling foundation is a great background. Could you, let's say, expand deeper into this? Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, I tell you, you know, a couple of years ago, I picked up a student, Chris Weidman. He's a 4-time All-American out of Hofstra. And, I mean, he beat Ryan Bader in college, he beat Phil Davis, he beat some of the notable guys. Now he's a Ring of Combat champ, he's 4-0, but he really kind of made me look at the wrestling a little different. You know, it was probably more jiu-jitsu, you needed the wrestling, but I'll tell you one thing wrestling brings, man, it brings a different skill set with it. It's the intangibles of that hard work, and these guys push themselves beyond probably any limit of the other martial arts that I've been involved with. They just, if you can get to like an All-American status or you're a Division I wrestler, it doesn't happen by accident. I mean, there's been a lot of hard work and sacrifice. So they're already coming in with some of the intangibles that are hard to teach. You know what I mean? So if a guy then is acclimated and he's willing to expand into the striking and some of the other stuff, I mean, that's a pretty good, you know, foundation to have. And I think if I had to pick, it's got to be up there now, man, because it's not even the wrestling, it's the sacrifice and the hard work these guys put in and the dedication that's going to transfer over into mixed martial arts now.
Now, would you say that